"Get lost, old man." The voice rang out sharply across the open-plan office, loud enough to silence keyboards and turn heads. A split second later, laughter followed, careless, mocking, and unrestrained. It rippled through the room, as if someone had just told a clever joke. Something meant to lighten the mood of another long corporate day. At the center of that laughter stood an elderly man. He was thin, noticeably smaller than everyone around him, his shoulders slightly bent with age. A faded gray vest hung loosely over his frame, worn at the edges, layered atop an old, light-colored button-down shirt whose sleeves were rolled up unevenly. His trousers were plain, wrinkled from use rather than neglect, and his shoes, once sturdy, were now dulled and scuffed. In his right hand, he held a wooden cane, its surface smooth from years of steady grip. Water dripped steadily from his clothes, that it ran from his thinning white hair, down the sides of his face, clung to the rims of his glasses, and soaked into his vest. Drops fell rhythmically to the carpet below, forming a dark, spreading stain right in the middle of the office floor. Just moments earlier, a young woman in a fitted black business suit had raised a metal bucket above his head. Without hesitation, she had tipped it forward, sending the water crashing down over him in a single deliberate motion. The splash had echoed against the glass walls, loud enough to draw everyone's attention. She hadn't flinched. She hadn't questioned herself. She had smiled. Now she stood with one heel slightly forward, arms loosely at her sides, clearly pleased with herself. Around her, several employees clapped. Others pointed. A few laughed so hard they leaned against their desks. Phones were discreetly lifted, screens glowing as people recorded what they thought was an amusing interruption to their workday. "Someone call security," a man said, shaking his head as if inconvenienced. "This is ridiculous." Another voice chimed in, amused. "He probably thought this was some charity office." "Seriously," someone added, "you can't just walk into a place like this looking like that." The old man didn't respond. He didn't argue. He didn't plead. He didn't even wipe the water from his face. Instead, he stood perfectly still, his fingers tightening almost imperceptibly around the handle of his cane. His head was slightly lowered, eyes cast down through fogged lenses, as if he were listening, not to the insults themselves, but to something deeper beneath them. This was no small office. It was the headquarters of a powerful company, one of the most talked about firms in the industry. Glass walls reflected bright ceiling lights. Rows of sleek desks stretched across the floor, each fitted with dual monitors, ergonomic chairs, and carefully placed company branding. Posters on the walls spoke of values like respect, teamwork, and integrity. Yet in that moment, none of those words existed. The woman who had poured the water took a step closer to the old man. "You need to leave," she said firmly, her tone sharp and impatient. "You're disrupting our work." Still no answer, she scoffed. "Can you even hear me?" she added, glancing around as more laughter erupted. The old man slowly lifted his head. Water slid from his glasses, dripping off the frame. His eyes, clouded by age but alert, moved calmly across the room. He didn't rush. He didn't glare. He simply looked. At the man who had told him to get lost. At the woman holding the empty bucket. At the employees who laughed, and at those who said nothing at all. He took it all in. What none of them knew, what no one in that room even suspected, was that this frail, soaked man was not lost. He hadn't wandered in by mistake. He hadn't come looking for help. And he certainly wasn't supposed to be invisible. He was the founder of the company, the man whose signature sat at the bottom of incorporation papers, the one who had mortgaged his home decades ago to keep the business alive in its first year, the one who had worked late nights in empty offices long before glass walls and modern furniture existed. For years now, he had stayed away from the spotlight. No interviews. No public appearances. To most employees, He was nothing more than a distant name mentioned during onboarding, a figure from the company's past, almost myth-like. That morning, he had made a quiet decision. He would come in alone. No announcement. No executive escort. No special treatment. Just himself, his cane, and his curiosity. He wanted to see how people behaved when they believed no one important was watching. And now he knew as the water continued to drip from his clothes and soak into the carpet. The old man took a slow, steady breath. Something firm settled inside his chest, not rage, not sadness, but clarity. Because while the employees believed they had just humiliated a helpless stranger, the truth was far more dangerous for them. They had just revealed who they really were. And very soon, much sooner than they expected, this entire office was going to learn a lesson. None of them would ever forget that no one noticed the subtle shift in the room at first. The laughter faded unevenly. Not because anyone felt guilty, but because the moment had stretched a little too long. The old man still hadn't moved. He hadn't begged. He hadn't shuffled toward the exit like they expected. Instead, he stood there, drenched, silent, and strangely composed, as if the humiliation had passed straight through him without leaving a mark. A few employees exchanged glances. "That's enough," someone muttered, suddenly uncomfortable. "Just escort him out." The woman with the bucket rolled her eyes and stepped back, clearly done with the situation. "I'm not security," she said dismissively. "Someone else handle it." A young manager finally stood up from his desk. He adjusted his blazer, exhaled in annoyance, and walked toward the old man with the confident stride of someone used to giving orders. "Sir," he said loudly, enunciating each word as if speaking to a child, "you cannot be here. This is private property." The old man turned his head slightly toward the sound of the voice. "Yes," he replied calmly, his voice low but steady. "I know." That single sentence caused a ripple of surprise. Several people blinked. Someone near the glass wall frowned. "You know?" The manager repeated, thrown off. "Then why are you still standing here?" The old man paused before answering. He straightened just a little, leaning less heavily on his cane. "Because," he said, "I wanted to see something." A few chuckles broke out again, but they were thinner now, uncertain. The manager smirked. "See what? How busy people work." "No," the old man replied, lifting his eyes to meet the manager's. "How people treat others when they think it doesn't matter." That shut down the laughter completely. The room felt different now. The hum of computers seemed louder. A printer beeped somewhere in the background, irritatingly sharp. The woman who had poured the water crossed her arms, her smile fading. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "He's just trying to sound wise." The old man didn't look at her. Instead, he slowly turned, scanning the rows of desks again. "Some of you laughed," he said gently. "Some of you watched. And some of you wanted to stop it, but didn't." Several employees looked away. One woman lowered her phone, her cheeks flushing. The manager cleared his throat. "Sir, I'm going to ask you one last time to leave." The old man nodded. "I will," he said. Shortly. Before anyone could respond, the glass doors at the far end of the office slid open. Two men in dark suits stepped inside, followed by a sharply dressed woman holding a tablet. Their posture was formal, their expressions serious. Conversations died instantly. Chairs scraped softly as people stood up without realizing why. The manager froze. The woman with the bucket turned pale. The suited woman looked directly at the soaked old man, her eyes widening in shock. "Mr. Harrison?" she said, her voice tight. "Why didn't you tell us you were coming today?" A heavy silence crashed down over the office. Faces drained of color. Mouths fell open. Someone whispered, "Harrison, as in." The old man finally allowed himself a small, tired sigh. He reached up and removed his wet glasses, wiping them slowly with a handkerchief from his pocket. "Yes," he said quietly. As in that Harrison. No one laughed now. The manager's knees seemed to lock in place. The woman who had poured the water took an involuntary step backward, her confidence evaporating in seconds. Phones disappeared into pockets. No one dared speak. The old man looked around one final time, his gaze calm but piercing. "I came here today," he said, "to understand what kind of company this has become when no one thinks I'm watching." He turned slightly toward the executives behind him. "I believe," he added, "I have my answer." And with that, the balance of power in the room shifted completely, leaving every single employee to wonder what consequences were about to follow. The silence that followed was suffocating. No one moved. No one dared to speak. The same office that had been filled with laughter minutes earlier now felt impossibly small, as if the glass walls were closing in. The old man, Mr. Harrison, stood at the center of it all, water still dripping from his clothes, his cane resting firmly against the floor. The executives behind him remained still, waiting. Finally, Mr. Harrison took a slow step forward. Then another. The sound of his damp shoes against the carpet echoed louder than it should have. Every eye tracked his movement. Every breath held. "You know," he said calmly, breaking the silence, "this building didn't always look like this." No one responded. "When we started," he continued, "there were no glass walls, no designer desks, just a rented room with flickering lights and furniture pulled from dumpsters." He gestured vaguely around him. "But there was one rule I never compromised on." He stopped near the desk where the laughter had started. "That rule," he said, turning slightly, "was respect." The young manager swallowed hard. "Mr. Harrison, this was a misunderstanding," he began quickly. You thought I was nobody," Mr. Harrison interrupted, not raising his voice. "And you treated me accordingly." The manager opened his mouth, then closed it again. Mr. Harrison turned his attention to the woman who had poured the water. She stood rigid now, arms pressed tightly against her sides, her earlier confidence completely gone. "Tell me," he said, looking directly at her, "would you have done that if you believed I mattered?" Her lips trembled. I didn't know," she whispered. He nodded slowly. "Exactly." He shifted his gaze across the room. "This company grew because people here once believed that how you treat others, especially when there's nothing to gain, defines who you are." Several employees stared at the floor. One man wiped his palms on his trousers. A woman near the back quietly stepped away from her desk, shame written across her face. Mr. Harrison straightened, leaning less on his cane than before. "Today wasn't a test of loyalty," he said. "It was a test of character." He turned toward the executives behind him. "Call human resources," he said simply, "and cancel all meetings for the rest of the day." A ripple of fear spread instantly. "Effective immediately," he continued, addressing the room again. "We will be reviewing conduct across every department starting with this floor." A sharp intake of breath could be heard. "No one is being judged by their position," Mr. Harrison added, "only by their behavior." The weight of his words settled heavily on everyone present. Some people looked panicked. Others looked regretful. A few, very few, looked quietly relieved, as if they had been waiting for someone to finally say what needed to be said. Mr. Harrison took one final look around the office. "I built this company to give people opportunity," he said, "not to watch them forget their humanity." Then he turned and walked toward the glass doors, executives following closely behind him. As the doors slid shut, the employees were left standing in stunned silence, fully aware that their actions, seen for just a few cruel moments, had changed their futures forever. The moment the glass doors slid shut behind Mr. Harrison, the office erupted not into noise, but into panic. People looked at each other with wide eyes, faces pale, mouths half open as if words might come but never did. Chairs scraped loudly against the floor as employees stood, sat back down, then stood again, unsure what to do with their bodies now that the illusion of control had vanished. What just happened? Someone whispered. That was him, another murmured. That was really him. The woman who had poured the water stood frozen in place, her arms hanging uselessly at her sides. The empty metal bucket still rested near her feet. She stared at it as if it didn't belong to her anymore, as if it had acted on its own. I didn't know, she repeated softly, more to herself than anyone else. I swear I didn't know. But the room no longer cared about explanations. Across the floor, the young manager sank slowly into his chair, his face buried in his hands. His mind replayed every second, his tone, his words, his smug confidence. He could already imagine the meeting invitations, the reports, the silent judgments that would soon follow. Human resources arrived within minutes. They didn't raise their voices. They didn't accuse. They simply observed, took notes, and asked people to step aside one by one. Names were written down. Statements recorded. The casual cruelty of earlier was now dissected under a cold, professional lens. Meanwhile, in a private conference room upstairs, Mr. Harrison sat alone. An assistant offered him a towel, a fresh jacket, a glass of warm water. He accepted them with a nod, his movements slow but deliberate. As he dried his glasses and replaced them on his face, his reflection stared back at him, older than he remembered, heavier with disappointment. He had hoped quietly, foolishly, that this wouldn't be necessary. When the executives entered, the atmosphere shifted immediately. They took their seats carefully, waiting for him to speak. I don't want performative apologies, Mr. Harrison said at last. I don't want speeches about company culture written after the fact. One executive nodded. What would you like to do, sir? Mr. Harrison leaned back slightly. I want accountability, he said. And I want change that lasts longer than my name on the building. Downstairs, the employees waited. Hours passed. The office that once buzzed with productivity was eerily quiet. No one dared open a laptop. No one joked. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made people flinch. Some replayed their actions again and again, wishing they had spoken up. Others wondered how many times they had laughed at things that shouldn't have been funny. A few sat in silence, realizing this was the first time they had ever been forced to confront who they were when power seemed distant. Finally, an announcement came through the intercom. All employees on this floor are required to attend a mandatory meeting in the main conference hall. The walk there felt like a procession. When they entered, Mr. Harrison was already seated at the front. Clean now, dressed in a dry jacket, he looked every bit the powerful man he was, but his eyes were tired. He stood slowly as everyone settled. I won't waste your time, he began. Because time is something none of us get back. He paused, letting the weight of the room settle. What happened today wasn't about me being disrespected. I've lived long enough to survive worse. Several people looked up, startled. It was about how easily dignity was taken from someone you believed had none to lose. Silence. Some of you laughed. Some of you watched. Some of you stayed quiet to protect yourselves. He scanned the room. And a very small number of you felt uncomfortable but said nothing. He took a breath. Every one of those choices matters. Then came the consequences. Formal warnings. Immediate suspensions. Mandatory training. Leadership positions revoked. Not all at once, but enough to make it clear this was not symbolic. To the woman who poured the water, he spoke last. You will not be terminated today, he said, surprising many. But you will no longer hold authority over others until you understand what that authority truly means. Tears slid down her face as she nodded. This company will not survive on profits alone, Mr. Harrison concluded. It will survive on the character of the people inside it. When the meeting ended, no one applauded. They walked out quieter than they had ever entered. And somewhere deep within the company, something fundamental began to shift, not because of fear, but because the truth had finally been seen. The change did not happen overnight. At first, it was subtle, so subtle that many employees didn't even realize it was happening until weeks later. The office still looked the same. The glass walls still reflected the city skyline. The desks, screens, and schedules remained untouched. Yet beneath that polished surface, something deeper was shifting. Slowly but relentlessly, people became aware of themselves in ways they never had before. A joke half-formed on someone's lips would die before being spoken. A careless comment was reconsidered. Employees who once walked past others without acknowledgement now paused, nodded, or offered a quiet greeting. It wasn't forced. It was cautious at first, then intentional. Mr. Harrison's presence lingered like a shadow, not threatening, but impossible to ignore. He continued his quiet visits. Sometimes he sat in common areas, sometimes he stood near windows, sometimes he walked the halls alone. He never announced himself. He never demanded attention. Yet wherever he appeared, conversations softened, postures straightened, and behavior shifted, not out of fear, but awareness. He listened far more than he spoke. In one department, he overheard a heated discussion between two colleagues. Instead of intervening, he waited until they noticed him standing nearby. The room went silent. He simply nodded and walked away. The argument never resumed. In another instance, he noticed an intern hesitate at the doorway of a meeting room, unsure if she was allowed inside. Without saying a word, Mr. Harrison stepped aside and held the door open. The intern entered, stunned, and later told her team it was the first time she felt she truly belonged. Stories like that spread quietly through the company, for those directly responsible for the humiliation. The experience was far from over. The former manager struggled daily, not just with his reassignment, but with the loss of identity that came with it. Authority had once defined him. Without it, he was forced to confront how much of his confidence had been built on power rather than competence. He worked longer hours now, double-checking his tasks, asking questions he once mocked others for asking. Some colleagues pitied him. Others resented him. But slowly, something unexpected happened. He began to change. He apologized awkwardly at first, then sincerely. He listened instead of interrupting. He learned names he had never bothered to remember. And while not everyone forgave him, many noticed the effort. The woman who poured the water faced a different kind of reckoning. Every day, she carried the weight of that single action. It followed her into meetings, into quiet moments at her desk, into her thoughts on the drive home. She was no longer defensive. Instead, she was reflective, sometimes painfully so. During one session, she stood and spoke without being prompted. "I didn't do it because I'm cruel," she said, her voice trembling. "I did it because I felt powerful. And I liked that feeling." The room was silent. "That's what scares me now," she added. How easy it was. Mr. Harrison, seated in the back, said nothing, but his eyes never left her. The company began hosting open forums, unscripted, uncomfortable conversations where hierarchy meant nothing. People spoke about moments they weren't proud of. About silence. About fear. About choosing convenience over courage. These weren't meetings about performance metrics or quarterly goals. They were meetings about humanity. Mr. Harrison attended many of them, never at the front, never as the focus. When he did speak, it was rarely more than a sentence or two. "Culture isn't what's written," he said once. "It's what's tolerated." That sentence became another quiet anchor. As months passed, something remarkable happened. New hires noticed the difference immediately. They remarked on how approachable people were, how respectful disagreements felt, how even senior leaders made room for others to speak. The company's reputation shifted, not because of marketing, but because people inside it behaved differently outside its walls. Clients noticed. Partners noticed. Competitors noticed. And one afternoon, standing alone in his office, Mr. Harrison looked out over the city and allowed himself a small, weary smile. The humiliation he had endured had not broken the company. It had exposed it. And exposure, painful as it was, had given them a chance to rebuild, not as a place of power, but as a place of principle. Yet Mr. Harrison knew the story wasn't finished. Because true tests of character don't end with apologies. They end when no one is watching. The real test did not begin with punishment, meetings, or policies. It began when time passed. Weeks rolled into months. And slowly, the sharp edge of that unforgettable day began to dull. New deadlines replaced old fears. New projects demanded attention. The story of the soaked old man was no longer whispered every morning, it surfaced only occasionally. Usually when someone new joined the company and asked why certain rules were taken so seriously. This was exactly what Mr. Harrison had anticipated. He had lived long enough to know that shock could force obedience, but only character could sustain change. Fear was loud but temporary. Habit was quiet and permanent. And so, without announcement, he stepped back again into the background where he had existed for years. No surprise visits. No silent observations. No reminders of authority. He wanted to see what would happen when people believed the test was over. At first, the cracks were subtle. An email sent with a sharper tone than necessary. A meeting where someone spoke over another voice. A tired joke that brushed too close to disrespect. These moments appeared quietly, almost innocently, as they always do. And this time, Mr. Harrison did nothing. He watched from a distance. Then something unexpected began to unfold. A junior analyst interrupted a tense discussion and said, calmly, "Let's slow down. We're not listening to each other." No manager corrected her. Instead, the room paused and adjusted. In another department, a senior employee dismissed a contractor's concern. Before leadership intervened, a colleague stepped in. "We should hear them out," he said. "They're part of this too." There was no applause. No recognition. Just correction. That was when Mr. Harrison knew the company was standing on different ground. Not perfect ground, but honest ground. The kind built slowly, through discomfort and choice. Still, he felt one final responsibility remained. He called for a company-wide gathering, not a dramatic one. No press, no cameras. Just employees seated in a modest auditorium, unaware of why they had been called together again. When Mr. Harrison entered, the room stood automatically. He raised his hand gently. "Please," he said, "sit." They did. He looked at them for a long moment, really looked. Faces that once carried fear now held attentiveness. Some carried guilt. Others resolve. Many carried quiet growth. "I want to explain something," he began. The room stilled. "I never came to test loyalty," he said. "I never came to test obedience." He paused. "I came to test invisibility." People shifted in their seats. "I wanted to know how this company treated someone it believed did not matter. Someone with no title, no authority, no value in the system." He let the words settle. "And what I saw," he continued, "was uncomfortable. But it was honest." Then, to everyone's surprise, Mr. Harrison bowed his head slightly. "I owe you an apology," he said. The room froze. "For allowing distance to grow between leadership and reality," he said. "For letting success insulate us from humility. And for forgetting that culture isn't created by policies, it's created by people." He lifted his head. "I failed you first." No one spoke. Many swallowed hard. "I will not always be here," Mr. Harrison continued. "And one day soon, none of you will remember my voice, or my face, or even my name." A quiet murmur rippled through the room. "But the way you treat others, when no one important is watching, that will remain." He stepped away from The podium slowly and then he said the words that would stay with them long after he was gone. This company does not belong to me anymore, Mr. Harrison said quietly, his voice steady but heavy with meaning. It belongs to the choices you make when power feels distant, when no one important is watching, when there is nothing to gain. The words settled deep into the room, not as an order, but as a burden and a gift. No one shifted. No one coughed. No one checked their phone. For the first time since the company's founding, every single person in that auditorium understood something fundamental. Culture was no longer something handed down from leadership. It was something they were now responsible for carrying together. Mr. Harrison took a slow breath before continuing. I've spent my life building systems, he said. Systems to grow, to scale, to protect this company from failure. But no system can protect it from cruelty if the people inside forget their humanity. He paused, letting his gaze move across the room, not searching for guilt, but for understanding. That day, he continued, when I stood soaked on your office floor, I wasn't hurt by the water. I was hurt by how easily dignity disappeared. A few heads bowed. Yet, he added, I was also reminded how powerful awareness can be. Because once seen, it cannot be unseen. He spoke next of the future, not in strategies or forecasts, but in expectations. Leadership would no longer be defined by titles alone. Executives would rotate through frontline roles, not as observers, but as participants. Feedback would move upward as freely as it moved down. Silence would no longer be mistaken for agreement. These are not punishments, Mr. Harrison said firmly. They are responsibilities. Then, something rare happened. He stepped away from the prepared remarks entirely. I want you to understand this, he said. I am not proud of that day. Not because I was humiliated, but because it took humiliation for truth to surface. His voice softened. I allowed success to make me distant. I allowed growth to replace closeness. And for that, I am sorry. The apology was not dramatic. It was simple, honest, and it changed everything, because in that moment, the company didn't see a billionaire, a founder, or an authority figure. They saw a man willing to accept his share of responsibility. When he finally stepped back from the microphone, he did not wait for applause. He did not look for approval. He simply nodded. Once. The room stood, not loudly, not suddenly, but together. Over the months that followed, the true impact of that day unfolded quietly. There were still disagreements, still mistakes, still moments of tension. But something fundamental had shifted. People corrected each other, not with superiority, but with care. A raised voice was met with a pause. A dismissive comment was met with reflection. A silent moment was met with courage. New employees sensed it immediately. They asked why meetings felt different. Why even senior leaders listened without interrupting. Why interns were encouraged to speak. The answer was never framed as a rule. It was framed as a story about an old man, about laughter, about water on a carpet, and about the cost of forgetting that every person carries dignity, whether you recognize it or not. Years later, when Mr. Harrison retired completely, he did so without ceremony. No gala, no speeches, no press releases. Just a single internal message sent at dawn. Carry this forward. That was all. Yet his presence never truly left. It lived in pauses before harsh words, in doors held open without thought, in moments when someone chose kindness over convenience. The greatest legacy Mr. Harrison left behind was not a building, a brand, or a fortune. It was a shared awareness. Because for one brief, unforgettable moment, everyone in that company believed he was invisible. And in that moment, they saw themselves clearly, and that clarity, earned through discomfort and truth, became the foundation of everything that followed.